My name is Evelyn, and I'm 38 years old. I was raised by a devoted single mother after my father passed away when I was in kindergarten. Despite our financial struggles, my mother, brother, and I found joy and contentment in our small family unit. Growing up in these circumstances, I developed frugal habits that carried into adulthood. Even when I began earning a decent salary, I eventually married Albert, a wealthy man I met through mutual friends. He was kind and introduced me to a lifestyle I had never imagined. However, our marriage quickly revealed stark differences in our views on money and gender roles. Albert envisioned a traditional home where I would take on the role of a homemaker, while I was deeply committed to maintaining my career and financial independence. Before we married, Albert had hinted at his preference for me to adopt traditional domestic roles. I made it clear, however, that I wanted to continue working, at least until we decided to start a family. He reluctantly agreed, and we proceeded with our wedding. But after the marriage, the reality of juggling a full-time job and household responsibilities became overwhelming. While I worked tirelessly both at the office and at home, Albert settled comfortably into the role of a traditional husband. He contributed nothing to the household chores, coming home each evening to relax while I managed everything. This imbalance began to strain our relationship, and I found myself questioning if this was all our union had to offer. Even as my dissatisfaction grew, I hesitated to express my feelings. I feared Albert might pressure me to quit my job entirely. I naively hoped that having children might strengthen our bond, but as the distance between us deepened, I started doubting the feasibility of starting a family. One evening, I finally broached the topic with Albert, suggesting that we consider having children. At 32, I was acutely aware of the ticking biological clock, but Albert's response was dismissive and cutting. "Kids? You're already so tired from work. How would you manage raising children?" His words stung, marking the beginning of a downward spiral in our marriage. A few weeks later, as I was preparing to leave for a business trip, Albert surprised me by wishing me well and hinting at a big surprise when I returned. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of hope, but when I arrived home, my world was turned upside down. The locks had been changed. Confused and alarmed, I called Albert, only to be greeted with shocking news. He had filed for divorce. Even more devastating, he revealed that he had secretly married his lover. He accused me of marrying him for his money and demanded I relinquish any claim to our shared property. I refused to be intimidated. When Albert attempted to pressure me into signing documents that would waive my rights, I insisted on a fair and mutual agreement. This led to tense confrontations, during which Albert belittled my financial status and mocked my upbringing. He even threatened to discard my belongings. Several days later, Albert called me in a panic. "What have you done?" he demanded. "What are you talking about?" I asked, puzzled by his frantic tone. "They've kicked me out of the apartment," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. "You're still staying there?" I replied calmly. "That's technically trespassing. It's a new month, and I'm no longer listed as a tenant." "But it's my place," Albert protested. "Actually," I reminded him, "it was a company apartment." Albert's carefully curated world began to unravel, exposing the lies and betrayal that had defined our marriage. As I moved forward, I found strength in reclaiming my independence and leaving behind a relationship that had only brought me pain. "I'm the leaseholder, so obviously, you can't stay there now," Albert argued, his tone smug. "That's ridiculous," I shot back, struggling to keep my composure. "Albert, how could you think it's okay to force me out without proper notice? As the leaseholder, you don't have absolute control over the property. It's a rental, not your personal asset. You can't just change the locks at will." Albert snorted dismissively. "I thought I made it clear, it was my lease agreement, but whatever. The property technically belongs to the apartment manager, not me, so I didn't need their permission to change the locks." He still didn't get it. I took a steadying breath. "Here's what you're missing. I already terminated the lease before you pulled your little stunt. Legally, I was entitled to stay until the end of the month. By changing the locks, you've tampered with someone else's property. That could easily be seen as criminal damage." "Wait, what?" His bravado cracked. "Why terminate the lease so soon? Criminal damage? Is that why there are police at my door right now? I'm afraid to open it." I couldn't hide my exasperation. "The police might be there for more than just trespassing or lock tampering. You should talk to them. Oh, and just so you know, I reported you for forging divorce papers. Filing fake documents with falsified signatures is private document fraud. Divorce papers require mutual consent and authentic signatures." "Albert." There was silence on the line as he absorbed the weight of my words. I pressed on. Those papers you filed are invalid. And as for Judy, your supposed wife, that's not a legal marriage. How did I find out? Did you assume I was in the dark?" His voice faltered. You know about Judy?" "Of course," I said sharply. "I hired a detective agency to investigate while you were parading her around. They uncovered everything, including your little wedding ceremony while I was away on a business trip. I took time off from work to gather evidence and prepare my case. I also discovered you were sneaking Judy into our home." Albert was utterly silent now, likely feeling the walls close in. After a long pause, he stammered, Please don't tell Judy I'm still married to you." I couldn't help the small, bitter laugh that escaped me. Why would I? It's not my responsibility to clean up your mess. But here's a reality check. Since you committed adultery while still legally my husband, Judy is now liable for compensation. I've already sent her a demand for reparation via express delivery. She didn't know you were married, did she? Too bad. At this point, I can't retract the claim even if I wanted to. Albert's breath hitched audibly. She hasn't called me yet, so maybe she hasn't seen it. She will soon, I said coolly, and by the way, you might want to deal with the police instead of worrying about Judy. I'll ignore the police, he blurted, panic creeping into his voice. I'm going to Judy's house now to intercept the letter before she or her family sees it. He hung up abruptly. I smiled grimly, knowing his efforts would be futile. The letter was sent as registered mail and addressed solely to Judy. Even if he intercepted the postman, he wouldn't be able to claim it. Several hours later, Albert called again, sounding utterly defeated. He recounted his failed attempt. I was there when the postman arrived. Judy answered the door and signed for the letter before I could stop her. She opened it right in front of me. "And?" I asked, feigning casual disinterest. "She read it," he mumbled, his voice hollow. "She threw me out of her house." "Good luck, Albert," I said curtly before hanging up. "I'll take that envelope," Albert demanded from the postman. "And who are you? You don't live here, do you?" the postman asked, his tone skeptical. "I practically live here. I'm married to Judy, so I have the right to receive her mail," Albert replied, his voice laced with desperation. "That's not how it works," the postman said flatly. "This is registered mail, and it's addressed to Judy. I can only hand it to her." "Just give it to me," Albert insisted, his frustration growing. "If you're that eager, you can ask Judy for permission," the postman said firmly, unmoved by Albert's demands. At that moment, Judy stepped outside, her face puzzled by the commotion. "What's going on here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Albert and the postman. "Albert, why are you making all this noise?" "This envelope is for you, Judy," the postman explained, handing her the registered letter. "Sorry for the disturbance, but this man insisted on taking it." Judy took the envelope, clearly baffled. "A demand for reparation?" she read aloud, her confusion deepening. "Albert, what's this about? You were married?" Albert paled and fumbled for an excuse. "It's nothing serious, just my ex-wife being spiteful. She's a little unpredictable," he said, forcing a weak smile. "I didn't want to bring it up because it's embarrassing, but I was divorced a long time ago." Judy crossed her arms, unconvinced. "If that's true, why is she demanding reparation? If you were divorced before we met, this shouldn't even be an issue." Albert hesitated. "She's probably just upset that I moved on and got remarried," he muttered, trying to dismiss the matter. But his excuses fell apart when Judy found my contact details in the envelope and decided to call me directly. Our conversation left no room for doubt. I explained everything: Albert's affair, the invalid divorce papers, and even the elaborate wedding ceremony they had held while he was still legally married to me. I also informed her that the marriage registration hadn't been submitted yet. Albert had apparently planned to file it on April Fool's Day, though he hesitated because he wasn't sure the divorce had been finalized. Judy was stunned by the revelation. Albert, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, hastily left her house. A few hours later, he called me, sounding desperate. He begged to meet at a nearby cafe to discuss the matter further. When I arrived, Albert immediately launched into a plea. "Evelyn, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's just pretend we've been separated for a long time and are officially divorced. I'll apologize to Judy and tell her I kept it a secret because I was embarrassed. Maybe I can fix this." I stared at him, unimpressed. "Do you think I'm still desperate to stay married to you? I was already planning to file for divorce, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation," I said firmly. "You're just trying to extort money from me." "Typical," Albert snapped, his frustration boiling over. "What do you even want? To ruin my life?" I leaned back, maintaining my composure. You don't seem to understand your position. If I say no, you can't marry Judy, your bigamous status will be exposed, and that will cause you even more problems. So, yes, you'll pay reparation, and we'll finalize the divorce. Albert sighed, defeated. Fine, I'll pay. Let's get this over with, he grumbled. Just sign the divorce papers and let me go. And about the property division? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Or are you planning to fight me on that too? Reparation should be enough, he snapped. We already agreed to waive property division, so let's make it official and be done with it. Good, at least you're not being completely unreasonable, I said with a faint smile. We went to a public notary, where we formalized the terms of our divorce, including the reparation and property division. After completing the paperwork, we headed to City Hall to submit the final documents, officially ending our marriage. As we left City Hall, I glanced at Albert one last time. Well, that's it. No more property disputes, no more entanglements. I hope you've learned something from all this, I said, my voice calm but firm. Albert didn't respond, he simply walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go, feeling a sense of closure and relief. I tried to keep the conversation light. What are you saying, that I'm the one benefiting here? By the way, do you even have assets after paying me reparations? Judy will also claim damages. You know, she even mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. Albert retorted dismissively, that's impossible. I'm marrying Judy. She can't claim damages. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. He was still entangled in his fantasy, refusing to face reality. Albert, you committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still legally married to me. Do you really think Judy still believes your story? I asked, incredulous at his denial. Marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Judy will believe me, he insisted, though doubt was creeping into his voice. I leaned forward, revealing more. Believe that if you want, but I heard from Judy directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them, you know. Albert's expression faltered. You know about that? I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken the property division and been better off, he snapped, frustration breaking through his tone. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided the property, you would have benefited more, I explained calmly, ready to correct his misunderstanding. Albert scoffed. What are you talking about? Poor woman, your family is poor, and you only make $210,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it'd barely hit $225,000. You don't have any property. I smiled faintly. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary was indeed $130,000, but you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no real interest in me. I became a director of the U.S. division. It's not $130,000 per year, but per month, $210,000 per month, making my annual income $52 million. Albert blinked, clearly confused. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $200,000 a year, he muttered, stumbling over his own disbelief. $210,000 per month, Albert, I repeated, letting the weight of my success settle in. Of course, I haven't had much chance to spend it, so I've been saving for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. As your wife, I could have claimed half of it. Albert's bravado crumbled. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay? After all this, do you think I'd gladly undo the divorce if you had that much money? You don't need to claim reparations, right? After all the contempt you've shown me? Absolutely not. This reparation is for the emotional distress you caused me. Honestly, I should claim more, and since it's official now, make sure you pay it, even if it's in installments, I said firmly. I'll be left with nothing, Albert mumbled. He looked utterly defeated. And don't think about going back to that apartment. Your belongings have already been moved to your parents' house. You thought you had few belongings, because I moved most of them beforehand. Were you really that indifferent to notice? I continued, driving the point home. Albert's shoulders slumped. So now I have to go back to my parents' house? They don't know anything yet. Let me explain. Don't bother. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said, don't ever step over our threshold again, I said, cutting him off. Overwhelmed, Albert sank into his seat, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused a scene at the police station. Ignoring my advice, he returned to the apartment, sitting aimlessly until the manager called the police. He was taken away, though it wasn't clear whether it was for trespassing, falsifying divorce papers, or obstructing public duties. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him. After speaking with me and learning about Judy, they decided apologizing to her family and paying damages was the priority. They went to Judy's house, knelt before her family, and settled everything, even covering the wedding expenses. Despite this, I decided to pursue legal action against Albert for forging the divorce papers. He offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I wanted him to understand the gravity of his actions. With everything handed over to my lawyer, the process wasn't too burdensome for me. In the end, Albert was convicted. His company fired him for being absent without leave. He ended up working at a relative's construction company, living in a basic shed-like structure without electricity, subsisting on just $6 a day for food, which his father deducted from his earnings. His parents were more stringent than I expected, determined to have him repay every debt before asking him to leave. As for me, after the divorce was finalized, I was offered a position at our company's head office overseas. Accepting the offer, I moved abroad, relieved to distance myself from Albert's potential interference. Work dominated my life at first, but a pleasant surprise awaited me. I entered a new relationship with a foreign executive at the head office. Things progressed quickly, and I am now pregnant, with plans to marry soon. I've been open with my partner about my past and my tumultuous relationship with Albert. He has been nothing but supportive. We've discussed plans for co-parenting, with him taking paternity leave while I return to work after maternity leave. His cultural perspective on sharing parenting responsibilities has been refreshing and transformative. Having endured so much turmoil with my ex-husband, I finally feel like I'm on the path to true happiness. My experience taught me that while divorce isn't always the desired outcome, enduring in silence is never a virtue. Honest discussions can lead to meaningful resolutions, and sometimes, divorce is a necessary step toward a better life.